Chapter 1. The Oakland Pulse. The first thing Richard remembers clearly is sound. Not words, not faces, sound. A low, steady thump, bleeding through the thin walls of his childhood bedroom in East Oakland. Kick drum, bass line, somebody's uncle laughing too loud over a card game. The needle on a record player sliding into the groove with that soft, crackling inhale. The house breathing in rhythm. Before he could say the word music, he could feel it. On summer nights, the neighborhood was its own kind of orchestra. Cars rolled down the block with windows open, systems turned up, snare drums cutting through the warm air. Somewhere down the street, somebody was barbecuing, and somebody else was rehearsing in a garage band that wasn't quite tight yet, but believed it could be. The sound of a funk riff trying to find itself, repeated over and over, made its way up the sidewalk like a promise. Inside the house, there was always a record spinning. His mother played the old soul sides, the voices that sounded like church and late-night confessions. His father leaned toward funk, to anything with a bass line that walked in like it owned the room. When they were in a good mood, they'd let the records overlap. Al Green melting into Parliament, Aretha easing into the Isley Brothers. The seams between songs didn't matter. What mattered was the feel. Richard sat on the floor, close enough to the stereo that his chest could pick up the vibrations from the speakers. Toy cars, forgotten in his hands. He didn't know the names of the artists yet, or the names of the instruments, but he knew this. Whatever was happening in those grooves felt like the center of the world. Oakland itself seemed to move that way. City buses let out sighs in time with traffic lights. Footsteps on cracked sidewalks kept an accidental backbeat. The port cranes stood in the distance like giant metronomes, keeping time over ships, rising and falling with the tide. On weekends, when the weather was good, the parks became rehearsal rooms. Portable speakers, live drummers, a circle of people nodding their heads in the same slow agreement. Yes, this is it. In that environment, rhythm wasn't an art form. It was a language. Richard learned to speak it before he ever picked up a guitar. His first drum was the kitchen table, fingertips turning syncopated patterns into trouble. His mother would call out from the stove, "Baby, that beat's gonna leave marks," half annoyed, half amused. It didn't stop him. He tapped during homework, during cartoons, during phone calls he was supposed to ignore. Any silence was an invitation to fill it. The guitar came later, almost accidentally. It was his older cousin's fault. One Thanksgiving, the cousin showed up with a sun-faded Strat copy slung over his shoulder, like he was bringing a guest to dinner. After everyone had eaten, and the grown folks had settled into the familiar loop of stories and mild arguments, the cousin pulled the guitar out in the living room and started playing along with a record spinning on the stereo. It was an old soul tune, the kind that moved slow and certain, like it had nowhere to be but right there. The rhythm section on the record was locked in, drums carrying a relaxed pocket, bass tracing warm, round shapes under everything. But what arrested Richard's attention was the way his cousin's hands moved over the fretboard, dropping in little responses, small comments, a tone that seemed to talk back to the singer without getting in the way. It was conversation without words, call and response, but through wire and wood. "Show me," Richard said, stepping closer before the song was halfway done. His cousin laughed. "You got little fingers, man. You sure you ready?" He was ready. The guitar felt awkward at first, too big, strings pressing red lines into his fingertips, his arm wrapped over the body at a strange angle. But the moment he plucked a string and it rang out, his own sound joining the air of that house, something locked into place. It didn't matter that the note was out of tune. It was his. In the weeks that followed, the guitar became an extension of everything Oakland had already taught him. He didn't start with scales or sight reading. He started with records. He'd sit next to the stereo, guitar in his lap, needle dropping onto worn vinyl. A drum groove would spill out, bass would follow, and he'd move his fingers along the neck, searching. Wrong note, almost, there, like trying to learn a language by mimicking the shapes of the mouth in a conversation happening just out of reach. He didn't always know the chords, but he knew when something fit. The test was simple. Could he make one note land right on top of the snare, or slide into the kick drum's pocket in a way that felt natural? If he could, he smiled. If he couldn't, he rewound and tried again. That's how Heart of the Village was born in him long before he ever wrote a song by that name. At that age, the village was his block, his family, the aunties and uncles who weren't really related by blood, but had fed him, scolded him, slipped him dollar bills on good days. The men on the corner who nodded to his mother with respect. The women who carried groceries up 3 flights of stairs like it was nothing. The kids who turned cracked asphalt into imaginary stages and basketball courts. Oakland was a village that hummed with its own chord progression. Tough on the outside, tender on the inside, looking out for its own. And the heart of that village, as far as Richard was concerned, was the groove that held everything together. On Saturday mornings, he'd hear live music before he saw it. A faint sound at first, almost more felt than heard, luring him toward the park. By the time he got there, he'd find a loose semicircle, a conga player, a couple of hand drummers, somebody with a battered bass, maybe a saxophone if it was a good day. Kids danced in fits and starts, some shy, some fearless. Grown folks swayed, adjusting their shoulders to the rhythm. There was always space for one more sound. It took him a while to work up the courage, but eventually Richard started bringing his guitar down to those informal circles. He'd hang back at first, hugging the instrument to his chest, listening. The drummers kept a proving ground groove, low and insistent, like a train that never quite arrived, but stayed approaching. People nodded, laughed, shouted encouragement when someone found a particularly sweet phrase. "Come on, little man," one of the drummers said to Richard on a late afternoon, sweat shining on his forehead. "You ain't gonna learn standing over there." Richard stepped into the circle. The first few attempts were rough. His fingers tensed up. His notes stumbled over the beat instead of nestling into it. He could feel the difference, not just in his ears, but in the way people's bodies reacted. When he was off, the dancers' movements got a little strained, like they were trying to adjust to a stone in their shoe. But no one sent him away. Oakland was strict about time, but generous with learners. "Listen to my right hand," the bassist murmured, leaning close while his own fingers thumped and slid across spick strings. "Don't fight me. Ride with me. See where I leave space? That's yours. Fill that." Space. That was a new concept. He'd thought playing meant saying as much as possible, filling every bar with sound, so people would know he could play. But here, in the open air with the city as their audience, he discovered something else. The power of not playing, of waiting, of letting the drums speak, then answering with just enough. He began to taste the difference between noise and groove. It was every musician in the circle signing the same unspoken contract. We are going to land together, over and over, in this shared pocket of time. We may wander and decorate, but we do not lose the pulse. We serve something larger than any solo. He started bringing that lesson back home, in his room at night, when the house had quieted, and only the distant sirens and late traffic whispered through the window. He'd put on a record and play as quietly as he could get away with. He studied how the guitarists on those records rarely rushed, even when the songs burned hot. They bent their notes just enough, behind the beat, making the rhythm feel deeper. Sometimes he'd mute the strings with his left hand and just strum rhythmic patterns, no pitch at all, turning the guitar into a percussion instrument. Chukka, chukka, chukka. Syncopated emphasis on the offbeats. He'd tap his foot, nod his head, try to carry the whole band inside a single steady motion. If his foot drifted, he stopped and started again. His mother would crack the door open and look in on him, a towel still over her shoulder from washing dishes. "You still at it?" she'd ask, part exasperation, part pride. "Almost got it," he'd say, eyes still closed, fingers still moving. "Mm-hmm." She'd listen for a second, then add, "Don't forget, People feel it before they hear it. So play like you care how they feel. He took that as seriously as anything any musician ever told him. At school, his notebooks filled up with doodles of guitar necks and imaginary band names. He joined the music class, then the after-school group, then any ensemble that would have him. Jazz band, funk covers, even a short detour through a rock group that rehearsed at a friend's garage until the drummer's dad got tired of the noise. Each new situation tested the same foundation. Could he hold his ground in the groove? He found that what he loved most wasn't just soloing, even though he could make a room lean in when he did. What he craved was the moment when the band locked in so hard that everything else, stage lights, audience chatter, the to-do list of life, fell away. Just 4 or 5 people breathing as one organism, anchored by a pulse that felt older than any of them. That's when music stopped feeling like something he was doing to the world and started feeling like something he was doing with it. The phrase "heart of the village" followed him around long before it turned into a title. He'd think of it on the bus, listening to the hiss of the doors and the low murmur of tired commuters. He'd think of it while walking home, sneakers scuffing a rhythm against the pavement. He'd think of it in church, when the choir swayed side to side and the organ leaned into a chord so rich it felt like a warm towel around his shoulders. He realized that what moved him most in all these places was the same phenomenon: a group of people falling into time together, whether they knew it or not. By his late teens, he'd started playing small gigs, backyard parties, low-lit bars where the sound system crackled and the monitors were mostly for show, community events where the pay was a folded-up 20 and a plate of food. He fronted a band sometimes, but more often he was just the guitar player on the side of the stage, content to be part of the engine. During one show behind a local singer, something shifted. The band was mid-set, working through a slow, earthy soul tune. The drummer laid down a lazy, swung backbeat. The bass player rolled steady, and Richard played a simple, repeating pattern. A few carefully chosen chords, a muted lick here and there. Nothing fancy. But the way it all sat together, the way the room's chatter softened, and the people closest to the speakers closed their eyes and nodded, felt like a culmination of everything Oakland had poured into him. They weren't just performing. They were holding the room's heart in their hands and massaging it gently, in time. Later that night, on the long walk home under streetlights that buzzed like tired bees, he hummed a melody to himself. It wasn't quite formed, just fragments of a tune that seemed to rise from the sidewalk. Beneath it, he heard a drum pattern, the kind of beat that could move you even if you were cutting across a parking lot alone at midnight. He heard a bass line, patient and insistent. He heard guitars, plural now, one holding the rhythm, another tracing melodic lines overhead. In his mind, voices floated over it, singing about home, about the block, about the way a city could cradle you and challenge you at the same time, singing about the invisible bonds that made a rough-edged place fall sacred. He didn't have all the words yet, but he had the feeling. This is the heart of the village, he thought. He didn't rush to write it down. He let it live inside him, grow slowly, picking up details from every busker he passed, every family reunion, every block party, where the DJ blended old and new cuts with respect. The song was less a composition and more a reflection, a mirror held up to the rhythm he'd been walking inside since he was a child on the living room floor. As he got older, and the world beckoned beyond city limits, other bands, other towns, the possibility of touring, there was one thing he knew he could never leave behind. That Oakland Pulse that had trained his heart to count in backbeats and syncopations, that had taught him that groove wasn't decorative. It was a way of being. Before he would ever share a stage with Kelly, before psychedelia drifted into his world and stretched his sound into new colors, Heart of the Village existed quietly as his private anthem. An unwritten promise that no matter where he went, no matter how far the music reached, he'd carry his first teacher with him. The teacher that sounded like bus brakes and crackling records, like laughter over card games and congas in the park. The one that taught him the most important lesson he would ever learn about music and about himself. If you find the pulse and honor it, everything else can grow from there.